This is a Walk for Change interview. My name is Bobby Rodrigo. I'm your host. Really pleased to be coming at you today. Got a very special guest coming on. All of our guests are special, actually. Talk a little bit about the Walk for Change. As always, walk4change.us. Walk4change.us is our website. Walk4change.us. Empowering people for human rights. Why do you walk for change? Certainly is probably going to be different than why I walk for change. But we need to walk for change. Liberty and justice for us all. So many areas that we need to work on. And mind you, this is not just a walk. We're not just walking across the country waving signs and singing songs and doing cadence and things like that. We're bringing legislation to the table, policy changes. We're talking to candidates, bringing candidates, empowering candidates, and we're coming across the entire United States to do it. We're going to start in California in June. We're going to wind up in DC right before the elections start, the last few weeks of the election. We're looking forward to doing it. We're working hard to do it. I'm working with some fantastic people all the time, and working with our communities has always been very special for me. So I have to tell you, that really excited. Again, I've been spending a lot of time talking about the medical aspects of plant medicine, all kinds of plant medicine lately. And Dr. Mary Clifton, Dr. David Rabin. Tonight I have another medical professional who's joining us, Janna Champagne, RN, Nurse Janna Champagne. And I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to bring it right in right now. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Janna Champagne, RN, Nurse Janna Champagne. Thank you so much for joining me, Janna.
Yes,
it's so good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Bobby. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. You know, the things I have learned about you recently is heartwarming, of course. And anytime I have a lot of experience working with the medical community over years in different aspects, and it always amazes me the way you guys operate naturally, you know, how you want to help. And I get that's why you do it. You know, you went into all these years of school and stuff like that, but it's still so much fun to see when you're watching it happen. And I just want to start with that. So we got to tell everybody who you are, why you do what you do. So first, of course, you're an RN. So talk a little bit about that, what, you know, your background, your education, and we can get to where you are then.
Okay. Well, I am a patient who happens to be a nurse is usually how I start my story, because I was working as a traditional nurse in a hospital back until 2012. I was a critical cardiac care nurse. I was working towards my nurse practitioner licensure in school, and I suffered a major health collapse. And the mainstream options to address my health just didn't make a lot of sense. So I began searching for alternatives, and that's how I came upon cannabis therapy. And it actually spared me going down the opioid pathway, which I credit for saving my life. Because you know, you see what happens to opioid patients, especially with long-term use. And so if it hadn't been for that health collapse and you know, my searching for better answers, I may or may not have stumbled onto medical cannabis therapy. And it made such a profound impact in my own life. Not only did it keep me off opioids, but it actually rebuilt my immune system and reversed my autoimmune lab markers, which is unheard of with the mainstream approach. And so I saw, wow, this is such huge impact. And then just a few years later, my daughter with autism entered a puberty crisis, which is common to about half the kids with autism when they come of age. And she began having extreme behaviors. She was self-injurious. She was aggressive towards all of her caregivers and authority figures in her life. She destroyed my house, holes in every wall, holes through her door, broke, you know, lights off the ceiling, things like that. And cannabis actually spared her out-of-home placement. And, you know, as a homeschooling mom, I had never, ever considered that, but it was almost mandated due to safety issues. And so the fact that cannabis made such a huge impact in both of our lives, I'm very passion driven, and I feel very blessed to now be able to help patients maneuver the cannabis industry and help find really optimal products that research supports for their conditions through my work. It really gives everything my daughter and I have been through enormous purpose. Very.
And that's amazing. So I want to back up a minute because
Yes.
your path, when you describe these things, your path to me is very important and needs to be highlighted in certain areas. And I don't want to gloss over it. You're a medical professional. You have all this training, and when you have a personal incident, you have the foresight and the, I don't know if the theory is the right word or whatever, but you're focusing on wellness in what I believe is lost a little bit in the medical community from the standpoint of running to Western medicine, running to opioids, as you talk about, particularly with pain management. Right. While we know that doctors are taught if somebody's in pain, you want to get rid of the pain. I mean that's a thing, So it's just that. What inspired you to do that? I mean, was it the fear of opioids and understanding what that's about, or how did you wind up looking a different way, just in that scenario?
Well, going through so much testing, and my health issues were extremely complex. I had 5 or 6 different doctors, and they were all saying different things. And one of my physicians recommended something that made no sense to me. When you're looking at the labs and looking at my considerations, I honestly felt like what he recommended was going to be very harmful and possibly even deadly. And it wasn't even the opioids at that point. It was addressing.
Sure. There's a lot of drugs that have different side effects and reactions besides just opioids, certainly.
Yeah. Because my immune system was in the toilet. I mean, I actually looked like I had HIV according to my immune markers without the virus. I didn't have the actual infection. It just collapsed. And this doctor, because I had some autoimmune markers as well, wanted to put me on immunosuppressive therapy. The piece of my immune system that was the most deficient, and we're talking less than 10% of the lowest normal on the lab test, was NK cell level. And that is your first defense against cancer. And he wanted to put me on methotrexate, which has a side effect of cancer. And I thought, are you trying to kill me? Like, what happens to poor patients that don't know better than to question your judgment? I mean, how many people have you killed? Like, seriously.
And that's,
the first piece where it's like, I need to be double checking these doctors. They're not thinking. They're not.
And really everybody does.
An individual picture at all. They're just trying to rubber stamp me and through their process. And this is not going to get me well. And then, the opioid piece was really when I sought the cannabis, because, cannabis, you hear it's good for pain. And I had a lot of joint involvement. I have randomly just dislocating joints, for example, very painful. Having been in the hospital, you see what happens to patients that are on long-term opioid use. And I knew this pain issue is not going to go away. It's still ongoing today, 9 years later.
Sure.
See patients after a couple on opioids, they're on such high doses that, if they have to go in for surgery, they can't even increase how much they're supposed to for post-surgical pain. That stops working, so they have tubes everywhere and no quality of life. Like, I've seen patients that were literally either sedated and passed out or awake and screaming pain and nothing in between. And I thought, that is not a path for me. The fact that I have addiction issues in my family was another reason. It was like, I don't even want to be there. And so this is when my husband at the time went and he had a friend who was a grower and went and got some trim from him and made me some good old-fashioned RSO for my pain. And only did it manage my pain and clear the brain fog that I was suffering, but it also began rebuilding my immune system. So it just, seeing it retrospectively, profound, huge.
Right, no, it is. Well, and I was actually talking about this recently in another interview with Dr. David Raven, and the thing that needs to be highlighted always, in my view, in any discussion relative to our bodies and cannabis and CBD and anything to do with the plant, is the fact that regardless of the use, we're feeding our body with a ingredient that our body absorbs and uses positively.
Yes.
I equate it to the analogy I use is, if you drink orange juice, you're always getting vitamin C, for example. So we have this receptor system in our bodies. We have the endocannabinoid system, which is, and I say this all the time whenever I'm involved in a discussion with medical communities. I hate the name endocannabinoid system, only because when you talk to somebody about it, they think you're saying something about the plant and they run.
Right,
and yet this is something that should be in our 4th grade science book next to the digestive system and the circulatory system, like we're taught. Right. So it's an interesting dynamic that we're dealing with, and you're highlighting it when you say how your body rebuilt its immune system. You're feeding it the things that it needs, like any other vitamin aspect, is
Right.
how I'm looking at it. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, and to add to what you're saying, I describe cannabis and cannabinoids as vital nutrients that our bodies need
Sure.
to remain in balance. And so vital meaning we need this. This is something our bodies require to be optimally functional. And, and aside from, learning it in our 4th grade science class, we should be teaching this in medical schools, and that is still not happening.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously is a big deal. You guys are, it's last I checked, and you'll know better than I, it was about 18% of the medical establishments, educational establishments in the country are teaching it, and the rest of them are not.
Yes.
And so our medical community it's almost like you have to give them a pass because the doctors don't know anything about it. They're not taught it. And that's a problem, obviously, from the standpoint of wellness.
Huge. And then, approaching medical professionals, I often get contacted by physicians that don't understand cannabis or the endocannabinoid system because I work with their patients. Their patients have these miraculous results that they've never been able to achieve with pharmaceuticals. And they call me and say, tell me more about this. And of course, a lot of physicians are very hesitant because of the Schedule I placement of cannabis.
Sure.
But once you start to explain that cannabis meets 0 of the 3 criteria for Schedule I, 0. We had
0, yes.
Judge.
Please say that again. And why? Let's stop there for a second. Because this, of course, has been, for those of us that have been fighting cannabis out of the womb, like myself, this has always been a big deal. And really, from an advocacy side, and I don't know how much you've gone down this rabbit hole, but for decades, this has been our argument. More before it even got to the medical side of it, is the Schedule I aspect of it. We're talking about the argument in the 70s and 80s where we weren't even allowed to raise the courts wouldn't even docket the argument. It was absurd.
They did in 88 though.
No, yes, right. So we're talking, right, yes.
Right.
And the fact that we're having this, like the medical research discussion that we're having right now in DC with the DEA and not releasing the research, and I know you're familiar with all of that. It's literally crazy on that. So I just, again, I don't want to gloss over these issues. Please tell everybody again about cannabis and Schedule I, please.
Yes, so cannabis meets 0 of the 3 criteria for Schedule I. It's not harmful. We have 5,000 years of cannabis use in cultures around the world. Not a single death ever attributed to cannabis. Ever.
Not a single death, everybody.
Can you say the same thing about opioids, which are freely allowed? Absolutely not.
You can't say that about the last hour.
Yeah, they stop. If a patient takes too many opioids, they stop breathing. It kills them. This happens every day, every hour, like you said.
And then meanwhile, the FDA approved, what was it, about 5 years ago, that it can be prescribed to people children as young as 11.
Oh,
which
insane. Insane.
Totally.
They're using our population as experimental subjects without.
Absolutely.
It's not okay. Ethically, that is a huge no-no.
And and again, you're raising another issue. When the Hippocratic Oath.
Yep, absolutely.
What is your first duty, right? Do no harm. Do no harm. Right?
Do no harm.
And yet you're inside the medical community for your adult life. Talk about that.
Yes, and so this is often how I'm able to reach medical professionals. Dubious is explaining it doesn't meet the Schedule I criteria. It's pure hypocrisy. We had a DEA judge agree with us on that point back in 1988. And
yes, we did.
Recommend that cannabis be removed from Schedule I. The DEA fired him, brought in somebody else, overturned it, and 32 years later, we're still fighting the fight with all of this factual evidence on our side. It's ridiculous. So why is this? Because there's so much money entangled with the pharmaceutical companies.
Big pharma.
That's it. It's not in the best interest of patients. And so then I bring up the Hippocratic Oath and the fact that as medical professionals, we have taken an oath to weigh the risk versus the benefit of all of the options for our patients, all of them, not just the ones that are making our politicians and pharmaceuticals money.
Right.
You do that objectively and include cannabis in that equation, 9 times out of 10, it will be the best option to start the patient with.
Yeah.
Period.
And it's certainly not going to harm them. I mean, so
right.
you have a situation where, doctors do their best, hypothesize. based upon evidence, you know, that they're seeing before testing, et cetera. And the
Right.
one thing they can't do is make a mistake that it's going to have harmful. It's not going to kill anybody.
Exactly.
You know?
So why not try it first? Why
Yeah.
not? And so this is the ethical shift that happens in medical professionals that enter the cannabis industry and begin advocating
Right.
for access to cannabis for their patients, is because they realize, hey, that's exactly what we're taught to do. And yet our mainstream medicine goes the opposite direction most of the time. So that
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting, you mentioned Schedule I and the DEA and of course in doctors.
Yep.
And what a lot of people don't realize that aren't in states that have it or don't use or haven't found a reason to try it is that all these medical marijuana rules that we have, no one's getting a prescription for marijuana. All they're getting is permission to go buy it tax-free and have it, and that's all it is. You know, you don't get a script and you don't walk into Rite Aid and pick up like you should be able to, because everything else in there kills you. I mean, everything else, if you think about all the things that you ingest, every single one of them has a side effect that can kill you. There is nothing that doesn't. It's absurd. And yet the one thing, as you mentioned, you know, and there of course are others, plant medicines, that fall into the same category, obviously. And it is interesting. We all know what happened. We know the propaganda. We know where all this comes from, of course. And those of us who study it, it is absurd. But I don't want to go down that thing. I want to focus on you.
It's okay. It's okay.
Well,
It's
you know, we could do this all night. I mean, it's crazy with what we're faced with. I mean, you go back to Reefer Madness and you know, don't Janna, don't smoke any more marijuana because you're gonna go have sex with a black man. This is 1930.
Oh yeah. Oh God. Really? God forbid.
Yeah. I know. It's that hard. You know, control yourself. Control yourself. So it's absurd. And people, you know, I say that to people, oh, that didn't happen. I say, are you kidding? I said, of course it happened. Just go look it up. You know, information at our fingertips. It's not. It's the propaganda is what we're dealing with to get this the way it's supposed to be. You know, so you cared for yourself, and then now we're talking about your daughter and autism and where you were at. So again, I didn't want to gloss over those other aspects, but pick up where you left off with your daughter. You were talking about the house being destroyed and self-injury and things like that.
Yes, and so cannabis calmed her behaviors. The research I've done since, I believe that there's plenty of evidence to support that autism is endocannabinoid deficiency at its root. When we supplement these kids with cannabis, you know, most of the time, not only do we see a reduction in their symptoms, but we also see improved function, improved development, improved intelligence. I mean, it's really filling a deficiency that's at the root of the problem we call autism. Historically, this is another thing a lot of people don't understand, is that cannabis was our mainstream medicine until 1937.
Exactly. And that's another good point, of course.
Yeah, the physicians in this country actually had to pull over their eyes because they knew it as cannabis, and it was used for dozens of conditions. It was our go-to for so many things. The government came in, and of course, cannabis and hemp is competition not only for pharmaceuticals, but half a dozen other industries like paper and textiles, you know, cotton, and
the absurdity of the hemp industrial market is ridiculous.
Yeah.
If you
so
just
they rallied.
I mean, if you eliminate the CBD and THC discussion about it, and you talk about biofuel and paper, like you say, and
hempcrete.
It just goes on and on and on.
Yes.
And that means we don't have plastic. We don't have to use plastic. We can build cars with it. We don't have to have all this fuel issues. We have a biodiverse community. It doesn't do any harm. We don't even need pesticides to do it.
Right.
And yet here we are.
Yeah, and so these huge corporations rallied to get cannabis made, you know, taxed so heavily that it was not accessible for anybody. And they called it the Marijuana Tax Act.
They did.
It's a stigma against Mexican Americans because Mary and Juan, you know, very common names. The physicians didn't know it as marijuana. So it passed. And after the fact, they went, wait a minute, marijuana is cannabis? What the heck are we doing? That's our medicine.
Exactly.
Effective. We know it's safe. Why would they do this? So, you know, most of the physicians found out about it after the fact, which is why they weren't, you know, up in arms and saying, no, we can't do this.
Right.
But that happened in 1937, and cannabis went from being extremely accessible, walk into a drugstore, buy it, all good, to nobody can afford it. And it was only a couple of years later that the very first diagnosis of autism showed up in the medical journals. So that's further support that autism at its root is an endocannabinoid deficiency.
I wasn't aware of that. That's an interesting.
To maintain.
Yeah.
If we had removed cannabis from our medical, our arsenal that we have, we may not even have autism in existence today.
It's interesting that you say that, because
not in the levels we have right now.
It is a common discussion, fairly common discussion.
Huge.
About when it comes to what we ingest in our body, let's say in the last 40 years, and how our health has changed on the basis of the crap that is being funneled our way. Just yesterday I read I didn't get into the article. I didn't read the journal research paper, but it was about obesity being a factor in having a child that has mental health issues and ADHD. And I'm like, okay. I wanted to facepalm myself, but then I thought a little bit about, the aspect of where we are in the food industry, for example. And it makes sense that is a possibility. And you're just raising another issue. We certainly we deal with things in our society based upon what we're ingesting in our body all the time. There's no question about that. And it doesn't mean that it can be in the air. It doesn't matter. There was another article yesterday that how Crystal Geyser in California just admitted that they've been putting arsenic into the water table in California, for however many decades. And they got convicted. It was a felony. And what did they get? They got a fine.
Yeah, a little slap on the wrist for them, where they're still fully profitable. They just have.
We don't want to take them off the shelves, of course.
Right.
So, but it's important what you're saying, because hey, you know what? You could be wrong, but you're probably not, basically, because the evidence points to what you're saying. This happens, and then all of a sudden, here's a reaction in it's our human ecosystem, basically, what we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, and there's another research study that supports that autism is linked with anandamide deficiency, which is, of course, our endocannabinoid.
Right.
THC from the plant will mimic exactly. And I wrote up my daughter's story, and it landed on the cover of a nationwide cannabis industry magazine a couple of years ago. And that has a lot of the research supporting cannabis for autism. And there's so much out there supporting that not only is it good for symptom management, but it's good for addressing the underlying imbalances inherent with autism, which is neurological, immune system, and gut. So, it's really, and most of my thousands of patients that I've worked with, predominantly families of kids with autism. I'm kind of known as the autism cannabis nurse. So
I want to get into that a little bit, because you told me something earlier that I wasn't aware of that I want to make sure everybody hears about. But before I go there, how is your daughter doing?
My daughter is doing amazing. She is 17 years old now. So to give a little bit of reference, she was diagnosed very severe autism at age 2. She had gone through a major regression, and she was brain injured. It's a whole story in itself we won't get into, but she basically at 19 months of age went developmentally regressed to an infantile state, where she lost all of her language, she lost her eye contact, she lost her receptive language, she lost her bond with pretty much everybody but me. 2 years old, her daddy would walk in the door after a long day at work, and she wouldn't even acknowledge it if he could help. She would call her, and she just would keep doing what she was doing. So it was really profound. So she was nonverbal until age 10. At age 7, she was diagnosed mentally retarded by the school district, and they attempted to put her into a classroom that was glorified babysitting, no academic focus. They didn't believe she could learn or retain information. So now 17, so cannabis came into her life at age 13, 14, when she began puberty and having those high-level behaviors. Now at 17, she's fully verbal. She and I are having spontaneous conversations for the first time in her life. Academically, she just had some proctored testing by the school, because I'm homeschooling. So there was some foul play. Somebody was doing her work for her. She did testing, and she is at 11th grade level as a senior. algebra and geometry and reading and writing and
Oh,
spelling,
it's got to be exciting.
geography, and she knows all the states, and she knows East and West Coast. She knows the oceans.
Oh,
So
that's got to be so
very
exciting.
long way.
That's marvelous.
So,
That just got to just rock your world. That's got to be.
yeah.
Wonderful,
Yeah. And the you know, this, and we started the cannabis after a decade of autism biomed with a nurse mom. So we had tried all the diets, all the supplements, all of,
Sure.
you know, lots of different interventions. It's rare that a parent of a child with autism will call me and mention an intervention that I'm not familiar with.
Interesting.
Tried it all. And the cannabis, and the other piece was nutrigenomics, doing genetically individualized supplementation and dietary interventions.
Mm-hmm.
Things combined are what I credit for amazing progress the last years or so on that. So
That's fantastic. That's
huge.
Wonderful news.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So let's get into your work. So everybody knows what you do for the world, which is so important. You told me earlier. Well, first, actually, let me stop for a second. You also told me something that was really important.
Yes.
So the nursing industry just took a major hit in the state of Oregon.
We
I
did.
I wasn't aware of this. I'm sorry, I'm falling behind, I guess, damn it. But
Very recent, so don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah, so tell everybody what happened and how it impacted the nursing industry, please.
Yes, and so to give it a little point of reference, I've been doing consulting with patients for about 5 years. As a nurse, I assess their individual considerations of cannabis therapy. I teach what the research supports for their condition, check for pharmaceutical interactions, put together a really detailed care plan, educate the patient, and really help reduce the amount of time it takes for them to find an effective formulation for their condition, and also really optimize their outcomes by ensuring they're getting medical quality cannabis and things like that. And so I've been doing this a long time in Oregon under kind of a gray area under our state board of nursing, where they basically just said we can freely educate patients as long as we have the research to support our education.
Sure.
And then we have the National State Board of Nursing, which put out a scope of practice for cannabis nurses last year, or it was actually the year before. And so I began following those guidelines and making sure that I'm, you know, within my scope as a nurse and not jeopardizing my nursing license.
Sure,
Well,
of course.
in December of last year, just a couple months ago, I was at a meeting, and we were told that the State Board of Nursing in Oregon has decided to reject the national guidelines versus adopt them like we had hoped.
The national guidelines for cannabis.
Yes, they're called the NCSBN guidelines.
Sure, sure.
Specific to cannabis, to nurses working in the cannabis industry.
Sure.
Practice or what we can and can't do, basically.
Sure.
So OSBN has rejected those guidelines, and they came up with a statement that is extremely restrictive. It basically only allows nurses to educate patients about hemp CBD, and recreational patients only under very limited circumstances. So at this,
in a state that has medical cannabis.
Adult use.
Well, right. You're right. You also have adult use.
Yes.
Of course.
Anybody in the state over 21 can grow 4 plants, no paperwork.
Right. Absolutely.
21 can walk into a dispensary and buy several ounces of whatever they want. No.
And yet they can't go talk to a medical professional who's a nurse in the state.
Yes.
Because
yes.
I don't even know how to.
There's some law language that needs to be expanded a little bit to fix this issue. It's going to take at least a year. We're working on it.
Good.
I have shut down my consulting services to protect my license, and I've applied for my California state license so that once I get
show us the fingers.
Huh?
Show us the fingers.
I got fingerprinted today.
Went and got fingerprinted today, you know, because
yeah, they're still black. Can you see?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, so everybody, she showed me that before the show was coming on, so that's why I wanted to talk.
I think I'll keep my hands out of the frame.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you're so, you know, but it's important here because, you know, we talk about, we have such a section of our society that talks about, you know, let's follow the law, let's follow the law, let's follow the law. Well, you're following the law, and then they change the law. Yeah. You know, so you know, we're chasing goodness.
You know, and it would be different if the doctors were educating patients.
Yes.
And we have a few good ones. We have a few good ones here in Oregon that really sit down with the patient and walk through, you know, normally what I would do and educate and give them some ideas of products that might be beneficial specifically for them and things like that. Most
Sure.
here are card mills, so that they see the patient maybe 5 minutes. The patient walks away with a signature, not a prescription, no dose, no potency, no frequency, no specific chemical compounds or cannabis formulation, nothing. So then
Right.
the patient is reliant on friends and family, Google, Facebook groups, whatever it might be, you know, not reliable medical trained advice to pursue their cannabis therapy. And there are certain circumstances, you know, like pharmaceutical interactions, where the patient really should be getting assessed and making sure that they're proceeding in a safe manner, and they're proceeding in a manner that's really going to help them meet their medical goals.
Very important what you just
Really,
said. And for
yeah,
example,
we're filling the gap for these patients, and they just,
yes.
the gap
No,
is
it
SOL.
really is important because THC particularly has a psychoactive effect, for
Yes.
example. So
And it can exacerbate cardiac arrhythmias.
yes,
Metoprolol, it can make somebody think they're having a heart attack.
totally.
With
Yeah, they have to understand
thinners,
that.
make somebody bleed out. I mean, there's some important things.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
I know it would have to be like a perfect storm scenario for a patient to be harmed by cannabis and pharmaceutical interactions, but it could happen.
Of course.
Oregon Board of Nursing just made it, something like that is going to happen, unfortunately. So I'm livid for the patients who are now,
Sure.
you know, lacking a good solid resource to help them figure this out. Because you walk into a dispensary, how many products are there on the shelf?
Right.
And, you know, the bud tender may not know what they don't know. You know, there's some.
Well, right. I mean,
the
thing that's lacking in all of this are people like you. Yes. On the front lines, being able to deal with that. It's just, you know, again, I know we were talking offline a little bit, and I mentioned to you, one of the things I want people to do is go to their medical professional, the general medical professional, and say, hey, I want to talk to an endocannabinoid specialist.
Yep.
And that doesn't exist in our society as common as an ear, nose, and throat specialist, or as common as an orthopedic surgeon, for example. And it absolutely should. You know, we have cannabis in how many states now, and yet we don't have the medical side of it covered, and yet they complain about there being no research. It's just a ludicrous circle that we're in. Yeah. You know, it makes zero sense from a practical medical standpoint that we're dealing with this. You know, it's crazy. And thankfully we have people like you who are crossing the lines that are necessary and doing it the right way. We know we're not talking about we're in an alleyway somewhere doing some kind of black market thing for people.
Right.
You know, I want to get into your website, for example. So where we were going, so before we jumped into that lunacy that the legislators and the Oregon nursing did. So talking about your work and what some of your plans are and what is offered on your website, let's cover those areas.
Sure. And so, you know, if you go to my website, Integrated Holistic Care, you can see the link to my daughter's story. I've got some blogs, you know, with other information. I've got, you know, a questionnaire for patients that aren't sure if they should be seeking medical oversight of cannabis, you know, some yes and no's that can help guide them that way. But that website, as far as my calendar right now, is shut down because I'm not doing consulting. I also.
And that's because of what happened in Oregon.
Because of what happened in Oregon. And
sure, of course.
At that meeting where they announced this with my name and my face up on the screen, so walked away just feeling like, wow, if they want to make an example of me, they sure could. And it took me about a month of deciding, okay, I'm not going to tell them where to shove my license. I'm just going to be conservative about this. I don't need trouble right now. I'm in the process of turning my home here in Oregon into a cannabis care home for autism for my daughter and a couple of roommates that we'll bring in for her. So I just can't risk the trouble here right now.
Of course.
But it took me about a month to finally come to that decision.
Yeah, nobody can. I mean, you know, look, the fact that there is that kind of policing going on is absurd in itself.
Right.
But we have to, you know, we live in the real world. You know, we have to make intelligent choices that are best to move on, because ultimately you having trouble is not going to help you being able to help people, which is what your primary goal is here.
Right.
So I certainly support your decision, and one of the things that needs to happen, Walk for Change, for example, is we obviously need to deal with the state of Oregon's, or you know, nursing board, and I know you are doing it, of course, and I know there are others doing it in the state, but obviously that needs to have a light shined on it as fast as possible. These states are complicated. Washington is a mess, right?
Oh,
Right
yeah.
north of you. Washington's been a mess from the day they started this. And then when they did 520, and for those of you who don't know what 520 or 522, whatever, it's the highway that goes across Lake Washington. I used to live there. And that's the legislative number that they use to make adult use of cannabis. And of course, again, is another state that has cannabis run by the Liquor Control Board, which is brilliant, you know. And meanwhile, we have people who are using cannabis solely for the purpose of care.
Yes.
You know, and
Yes.
the fact that the Liquor Control Board is in charge of, and obviously I know in Oregon they have the Department of Agriculture but geez, guys, I mean, can we get your act together here and put the people in charge, you know, or and I don't even like to say in charge, but just let's just free the weed, you know?
Yeah, please. You know, it's not harmful. The only reason it's not free is because you can't patent the plant, so they can't make a lot of profit off of it. But, you know, the medical approach, even though I maintain that all cannabis use is medical, you know.
Yeah, me too. Same thing. Absolutely.
You know, there's research studies that show just smoking, you know, retrospectively 20 years, there was an 80% less instance of diabetes, for example.
Sure, 100%. You know, you drink orange juice, it's vitamin C, right? You drink orange juice, you get vitamin C. You drink, I don't know, blackberries. You eat blackberries, you're getting stuff that's important for your body. You smoke cannabis, same thing. That is exactly what people need to understand.
Absolutely.
You know?
But the medical approach differs. I don't ever have a patient call me and say, I just want to get high, help me. It's a medical problem. Oftentimes it's,
I'll have to call you.
No,
I'm kidding.
I have this problem. How do I best address it with cannabis? Or is it even possible to address this with cannabis? What does the research say? So it is a little bit different approach from the recreational market. And
it should be. I mean,
it is. Absolutely.
It should be. There needs to be the medical community involved in it anyway, regardless of what bridges get fixed later. The front line of the medical aspect needs to be dealt with the way you're dealing with it, without question. A lot of you are all doing. I mean, you know, I'm spending a lot of time with the medical community lately, you know, and we're going to continue to do that. And we want to make sure Walk for Change is very, very careful about the information that we put out there. We're not just going to throw out, hey, you know, go do this, go run and smoke. It's absurd. We're talking about people's care, you know, and certainly, you know, if somebody comes on and say, hey, you know, this is really doing good for me, that's great. I have no problem with sharing their stories, but I want to have somebody like you around saying, this is why this is happening, and this is the way we should do this, because you guys, I'm a nurse. Get a clue.
Yes, I am.
I mean, really,
I am
you know,
a nurse.
it's frustrating. I'm not trying to be flip. It's just common sense. You know, I'm done with the argument. I'm done with the debate. I'm not. I don't waste my time. It's just, you know, and it's been a long time like that. I want the solutions. Solutions.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in Oregon, you know, we are on the brink of the recreational OLCC, the Liquor Commission, actually taking over our medical program. And we're fighting that. We have a couple of great groups here. I'm on the Oregon Cannabis Commission Subcommittee for Patient Care. I'm working with the Oregon Cannabis Clinicians Group. We're fighting that. We're fighting what the Oregon State Board of Nursing is doing. We're trying to expand the medical professionals that are allowed to sign for cannabis cards. And so there's a lot of effort to really advocate for patient rights here in the state of Oregon. And so thankfully,
that's fantastic.
Trying to do something, it's just the wheels turn really slowly. And you know, I'm just learning some of the legislative stuff. And one of the senior members, a fellow nurse of mine, good friend, Mike Rockland, I was just like so frustrated one day. And I'm like, I just don't understand why things take so long. Like, why is cannabis still Schedule I placed? It's not. We've proven it. We've had a judge, you know, totally agree with us on this. And he said, Janna, you're just too logical for politics.
Well, of course, you know,
There's no logic in politics.
Yeah, I'm easily, I promise you, Janna, that I'm easily the most anti-partisan person you'll ever have a conversation. I hate everybody.
Oh, yeah. I hate politics.
Can't stand anybody. And you know that if one, so they say, well, what side of the aisle are you on? It says the people's side. Well, who's on the other side?
Absolutely.
The government. Because those are the ones that are making all the mistakes.
Exactly. Like the Conquer agenda is only benefiting the government, not the citizens.
Totally.
And the thing that frustrates me about the bureaucracy is that, you know, I've dealt with it long enough to know when you run into red tape, all you have to do is make a phone call to the person with big enough scissors and it's done immediately.
Yes.
Oh, it's going to take a year is complete BS. I'm sorry. No, patients are at risk of harm because of what they just decided. And we're really going to give them a year to fix it? I don't think so. It's not okay.
Meanwhile, people are dying.
Other nurses I could send my patients to until I can get my California license and be up and running again.
Yes. I mean, well, meanwhile, people are dying. I mean,
Exactly.
when it gets right down to it, or people are suffering, I mean, all kinds, the same thing that you deal with in a medical condition can be, if it's one person, that's supposed to matter.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're able to take care of pain, if you're able to, you know, we all know that, for example, hospice care, you know, my first introduction into cannabis being medicinal was watching, when I was 13 years old, watching somebody smoke a joint who just had chemotherapy for leukemia.
Yep.
Duh. You know, so I always say to people, well, that it has at least has the medicinal properties of Rolaids that is sold over the counter. You know, and obviously I'm being a little flip, but I'm not. I mean, essentially, if it's curing, you know, if it's curing nauseousness, I don't care what's the cause of the nauseousness. If it's curing nauseousness, it has a medicinal quality, and everybody knows that.
Yep.
Everybody knows that if you have chemotherapy and you smoke a joint, you're going to relieve your nauseousness. It is one of the most known things out there that's ever happened on Earth, and yet we're going to have an argument about it. It's ridiculous.
Right. Well, the difference is you can actually die if you eat too many Rolaids. But
right, exactly. So this goes back to my comment about everything that you see in a pharmaceutical store can kill you.
So they're restricting the safest possible option for most patients, while
there you go.
You know, this dichotomy of freely allowing pharmaceuticals killing people every day. Like,
and you have doctors that actually get up on a stage and I just sit there. I'm just like, are you kidding me?
But I'm too logical for politics, people. So don't listen to me.
Yeah, it's true. You know, we're having a positive conversation, but this is serious stuff that we're talking about all the time.
Really, yeah, I try to keep it light. You know,
well, we have to. We want people to listen. You know, if we sit here and you know, it's not going to work. You know,
it's like, what can we do? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And
advocate for the solution. Don't focus on the problem, because you're
focus on the solution. We have to get
anything. You're still feeding it. Focus on the solution and what can I do to fix this. Otherwise, you just go crazy.
So
trying to figure out this problem that has zero.
I can't do it. I just want to get the 4th grade science books fixed. You know, I mean,
really.
If we could just
or medical, medical.
Yes, if we could get
let's start teaching this body system in medical school and nursing school. How about that? Let's start there.
Well, I figure if we get it in the 4th grade science books, then all the people who want to become doctors will have another reason to become doctors, and they'll go looking for it when they get there, right? Because, you know, right? I remember the game Operation, for example. You know, these things inspire children. You know, when some children, you know, like when you're doing your science, I remember 4th grade. I use this. I remember it well. I was a brilliant student in elementary school, and you know, you do your projects, and you pick what system do you want to do a presentation to the class on. So we would pick, you know, the circulatory, the digestive, the nervous system. Well, these things inspire children to go a certain direction. Well, can we add the other system that exists? This is a medical fact now, scientific fact. This system exists inside our body. Can we add it to our 4th grade science book? And maybe we'd be able to get it, you know, up the ladder, because people are going to talk about it more. They're going to talk about it more. And they don't talk about it at all at any level. It's ridiculous. I just.
Well, it's starting to change. I actually just contributed to the first ever textbook for nursing school curriculum on the endocannabinoid system, written by Carrie Clark. And so it is beginning to shift, but once again, it's going to depend on the institutions choosing to teach that subject.
Well, big pharma's got to step. Well, so you talk about the dynamics of money, for example. Now we know there was just a economic report done about how much cannabis was sold in Colorado, over $1 billion worth.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is impacting this issue, in my opinion, is that the cannabis industry is holding on to their money because they know they can come swoop and take it anytime they want, because the federal government, if they feel like it, we see it all over the country. If they feel like prosecuting, they will do it, and the banks won't do it, and the credit card companies won't do it, and they're running fake armored cars around Colorado so people don't know where the real money is as they're moving it around. I mean, this is all legitimate stuff. Yeah. So when you talk about combating and the body politic, of course, well, big pharma's got all this money. Well, the cannabis industry has some money now too, but they're not doing that because they're afraid to. I mean, literally, they're afraid to give up the money that they have because it could be gone so quickly in any way, shape, or form. So we're not having that balance in the body politic, unfortunately. And the same thing with the schools. You know, we know big pharma does funds research all the time. And creates curriculums all the time, and here's a wing for Bear Aspirin over here at the University of this, and cannabis isn't doing that, unfortunately, and that needs to happen. That's one way that it'll be able to combat it, of course.
Well, yeah, and part of what needs to change is the political structure itself.
Yes.
Robert F. Kennedy talks a lot about this because a lot of our pharmaceutical legislation, we get it pushed through, we get lots of support for it. It dies in Congress because pharma owns Congress. Their contributions to Congress through their lobbyists are more than double that of the next leading industry, which is oil and gas, to put it in perspective.
Yeah, and they get a lot of
As soon as cannabis legislation hits Congress, it dies.
Yes.
Because they're all being paid off by the pharmaceutical companies.
Absolutely. You know,
the number one competitor to all pharma, and they know it. We have them shaking in their boots. They're fighting it with everything they have.
Oh, well, you know, Thailand's a great example. You know, Steve Sarich is over in Thailand, and we had a conversation about 6 months ago, I say, about this, where, you know, Thailand's being, you know, they just started a lung cancer research project over there in December, for example. And Big Pharma has been over there trying to get the patent on the plan, as you mentioned earlier, and they're getting nowhere, but they're desperate. They're trying to do that in the Asian market, you know, and that is what they do. We already know that they have, you know, the federal government has 2 patents here, for example, and then there have been a number of patents that have been issued to Big Pharma relative to cannabis in a number of areas. I was sitting reading them for a while, and they absolutely are desperate to do it. You know, it also, so like we mentioned oil and gas, and I always say to people, you know, they talk about clean energy and solar and things like that, so, you know, and they don't want to dip into the profits of oil and gas. They want to just change into the other market and earn just as much money. They could forget oil and gas. Why don't they just do solar farms and make the same money and look. It's like, can we have a common sense discussion? Please, just for 5 minutes.
Yep, logic is difficult with politics. They don't like oil and water.
You know, walking the halls of Congress is I just don't even want to talk about it. So
yeah, it's very frustrating.
It really is, and they spend all their time wanting to get reelected, and you know, they spend 30-40 hours a week when they're in session on the phone raising money down the street. You know, we're talking about the federal government now, but they're all doing that at every level. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, so we need to halt the campaign contributions and put a cap on it, and then we'll start seeing some adjustments.
Yeah, I think they
can't just be paid off to pay this law. You know,
we want to spike some drinks with some RSO. You know, I don't know.
Oh yeah, good luck with that.
I know, right?
When their family members start being saved with cancer, then maybe their perspective will.
Well, right. Well, and that happens. I mean, that's a real. You know, I'm actually interviewing a state legislator in about a week. It's next week, a week after next, who had that very same situation. You know, Jimmy Carter is a cannabis user. You know, so there are inroads in that regard, absolutely, and of course we know. For example, the elderly community is getting a lot of relief in their life from the intake of cannabis in various levels, CBD, THC, whatever, you know, and again, CBD is amazing. You know, it's you know, we've been spending a lot of time talking about THC, but CBD is amazing and does so much for our bodies, and there's so many different ways. And okay, so that reminds me. So something that you're doing that other professionals are starting to do, medical professionals are starting to do, that I want you to talk about your seal of approval. Tell everybody about that.
Okay, so I began a Cannabis Nurse Seal of Approval based on my experiences with patients and seeing their medical responses to different types of products. And, you know, got kind of frustrated about it. And, you know, you have cancer patient that's taking hundreds of milligrams of an isolate or CO2 and they're getting no benefits versus this other cancer patient over here who got onto a whole plant formulation that was lab tested and flower derived and organic, and they're cancer free and graduated hospice and 4 years later still alive and well. So what's the difference? The difference is that when we concentrate the flower as nature intended with all of its 500 plus therapeutic compounds, and there's probably more because we're discovering more every day.
That's a fact. They are. They keep announcing it. Yep.
You know, the plant works very differently. It really amplifies the entourage effect. It amplifies that underlying balancing effect that is really going to give patients the deeper benefits of the cannabis plant versus like a CO2, which has about a dozen compounds on the final product, or an isolate, which is one compound. And pharmaceuticals, and GW Pharma, of course, has the patent for CBD isolate. It doesn't work the same way. Not right. By the research supports that whole plant formulations work at 20 to 25% of the dose of an isolate or CO2, and that isolate and CO2 have a less predictable response in the body because it has a bell curve response. And I have an article that I wrote on this subject with all of the research attached. It's on my website, Integrated Holistic Care, under the blog. It's 4 criteria for medically optimal cannabis therapy. And so we took that research and took that article and made it the foundation of our Cannabis Nurse Approved program, where we are vetting products in the cannabis industry and helping teach patients what to look for when they're looking for medical quality cannabis. You know, if they're looking for more superficial things, you know, they want to get intoxicated, or they just want, you know, some pain management once in a while, you know, isolate or CO2 is perfectly fine. Something like cancer, the type of formulation can literally make or break the patient's response, because the patient could be taking hundreds or even thousands of milligrams of an isolate or CO2, and because they've landed on the far end of that bell curve response, it's not doing anything for them.
Sure.
No response. And they determined that in the article by looking at an inflammatory molecule in the body called TNFA. And as they increased the CBD, it peaked, dropped off, and stopped working at the higher doses. And that's isolate and CO2 versus whole plant. As you increase, the response increases. So it works more like we think it should. And there's just that synergy with all of those compounds. And so this is what I teach patients. I don't benefit from the sales of any product. The objective, you know, non-biased source. I just want what's best for my patients. And so, yeah, just following patient needs has led me to diverse activities in the cannabis industry. And that's one of my businesses, is cannabisnurseapproved.com.
That's fantastic. And
yes.
It's so very important. And I am very appreciative that you're doing that. And I'm sure those of us out there that are advocating, as well as all the patients, definitely appreciate that. So
yes. And it's called the flow criteria, just to be very clear. It's flower derived, lab tested, organic, and whole plant are our criteria for medical quality cannabis.
The flow criteria, how nice.
Flow criteria, yep.
That is fantastic. So
thank my nurse Jen for that one. I was going to call it the wolf criteria. She's all, how about flow?
yeah. So give us the acronym again for flow.
It's flow, flower derived. So this is specific to CBD. We don't want anything that's derived of industrial hemp. It's higher risk of
right, of course.
Have the same broad spectrum of compounds. We want it lab tested. Lab tested is the only way to verify potency and purity. And we found so many products that say one thing on the label and the contents are completely different. The lab is the only way to verify that what's in there is you know, what the label says. And we also require terpene lab testing, because that can help to guide, you know, which formula might be best for what situation in our patients. Or obvious reasons, we don't want to be adding any toxins to our patients that are sick, or, you know, heightened susceptibility to toxic insults. And then whole plant is that concentrated as nature intended. And we recommend food grade alcohol extracted or infused. Butane, I think, is a close second, but of course butane is not food grade. So, you know, a little less optimal. So that's what we recommend. And we have a list of a few suppliers on our website that meet those criteria. And we're always looking to add more. So if you have a product that meets those criteria, please reach out and we'd be happy.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure and do that. Willow Creek Springs products are certainly the quality that we're talking about here, and I'm gonna make sure that happens. I'll contact the manufacturer and get some products up to you so we can get the seal of approval, which is, I think that's a marvelous approach, and it's something that we do. I'm involved with the company from the standpoint of it being a distributor, and again, Willow Creek Springs. Joe Grumbine is the creator and the owner of the company. For many years, he's been doing it, many years, and he's involved in the Walk for Change and stuff like that. So that's something that we advocate for. As I've told you offline, Dr. David Rabin is also doing a medical board similar to that, and I'm certainly going to introduce you guys. And we want that to grow. You know, and for so many reasons, and one of the main ones is that, again, it eliminates the argument. It just eliminates let's get to the care. Let's get to the solution. That is marvelous.
Yes.
So
medical cannabis should be patient focused, right?
Yeah, imagine that. You're a nurse.
We got
You're a nurse and you want to be
patients.
patient focused.
Well, we got so frustrated with patients calling us, and sometimes they had spent thousands of dollars that they didn't really have to spend.
Sure.
That they got from a neighbor, a friend of a friend. They didn't know how it was made. They didn't know what was in it. It wasn't lab tested. And there were times when it's, you know, we just could not even condone the use of it for safety reasons. But
sure.
Even if they bought it from a reputable company, there's a lot of deceptive marketing. Why is CO2 called full spectrum when it has a dozen compounds in the final product?
Isn't that fun?
Full plant, which has more than 500, should be the only companies that are allowed to use that term, full spectrum, because it's extremely deceptive and patients get taken for a ride.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
it's very frustrating.
Imagine that.
Yes.
It's propaganda. Never heard of it.
It is, and it's reducing their medical responses.
Absolutely, and wasting their time.
Yeah, so when we're looking
at time they don't have.
Right. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it is. And when we're looking at patients and their outcomes and using that to drive research, we want the most optimal outcomes.
Right.
Right. So
tell everybody, please, how they can find you. What's the best way to find you? Because I know you mentioned that the one website is down. So
it is. Well, integrated holistic care, it's still up. They're just, you can't book on my calendar. You can still write, you have a need, and I'll send you to the nurse I feel might be the best fit for your situation. You can also find me on my media kit website, which is jannachampagne.com. My first name is Janna, last name Champagne, just like the drink. That is my real name, I promise. My husband's last name is Champagne. He's very French. And so that's a great way to reach me. You can also go to cannabisnurseapproved.com and reach me through that website. So those are my main portals at this point.
So I have one last question for you, Janna, and I want to know, please, why you walk for change.
I walk for change because I believe cannabis has the capacity to revolutionize our very broken healthcare system, and it's so badly needed. This is the answer we have been searching for in the medical community. And if you talk to any medical professional, and if they're candid with you, they will tell you how frustrating it is to be in an industry where we're supposed to be helping patients and we're not able to do it because we don't have effective tools. And cannabis is a tool that can be effective for so many areas where the mainstream approach falls short. So that's why I walk for change.
Thank you so much for spending some time with me and with us and with the Walk for Change community. And we certainly look forward to more interaction with you and more podcasts, more educational stuff. I know that you mentioned to me offline that you're willing to do that, and happy to have you on. And again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and so happy to hear the good news about what's happening in your life and with your daughter, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and please reach out. I'm happy to help whoever reaches out. So anytime.
Absolutely. Look forward to working with you more.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please remember, walk, the number 4, change.us. empowering people for human rights. We want to make sure that the information is correct. I'm so happy to have Nurse Janna with us. Everybody take care. Look forward to spending some time with you the next time. Thank you.